One of the big news events this morning, Stats SA to release the unemployment figures for the third quarter of this year. The official figure sitting at 33.5%. That's between April and June. Our business editor, Xolani Mbanjwa, has more.
Statistics South Africa is on Tuesday expected to release the unemployment figures for July to September of this year. The suspension of load shedding throughout the second quarter failed to prevent a 0.6 percentage point increase in the unemployment rate, which meant 158,000 people lost their jobs. It's despite the private sector previously blaming rolling power cuts for a lack of economic growth and job creation. The continuing load shedding reprieve could have little impact on the figures in the third quarter. Outside of load shedding, the COVID-19 pandemic and the 2021 July unrest have also been blamed for runaway unemployment in the country, which led to a number of company closures. Renewed optimism brought on by the government of national unity shows that both business and consumer confidence have improved. But the picture remains bleak among young people and women who are worst affected by unemployment. The rate among black women sits at nearly 40%, which is higher than the national average. Meanwhile, 3.6 million out of 10.3 million young people aged between 15 to 24 were not in employment, education, or training. While official unemployment increased to 8.4 million, the expanded rate, which includes people who've stopped looking for work, stands at 12.4 million people of working age. Labour expert Tony Healy shared his views on that unemployment data.
I think that the outlook is perhaps more positive, if I could use that word, than it may have been a few months ago. We do have the highest, amongst the highest unemployment rate in the world. Why would I suggest there may be a silver lining is because during the period of the previous government of national unity, unemployment figures were on average about 15% below what they are today. So I think we could look back and say what levers were pulled then, and can we replicate those? But I do think much more needs to be done because it really is a national crisis and nothing has been done. And we know that because we've been living with approximately 4 out of 10 South Africans being unemployed for about 20 years.
The picture is far worse when considering the number of people who are not in employment, education or training, which is at 16.3 million. For Newzroom Africa on Channel 405, I'm Xolani Mbanjwa in Johannesburg.
Well, as you know, there are all sorts of debates and estimates about how many people don't have jobs. It's probably between 10 and 12 million people, but youth unemployment is particularly high. Younger people much more likely to be without a job than older people. Nape Senong is a mobilizer strategist at Youth Capital. They campaign for policy changes to solve unemployment. Nape, good morning to you. And thank you so much for your time. So many people have been talking about how things have changed since the formation of the coalition after the elections. Do you think there's any reason to believe that more young people have been employed since the new government? It seems unlikely to me.
Good morning, Stephen, and thank you for having us on the show. I think youth unemployment in this country is a national crisis, and what I've seen from the new GNU government coming in, it doesn't show a lot of commitment, or it doesn't show a lot of response to it as a crisis. We keep talking about it as if it's just like, any other of the problems. I'm not saying that there's a hierarchy to challenges, but at the moment, we are definitely in a crisis. And from what we've been seeing, I don't think that there is that concerted effort or that kind of, crisis response that we've seen from the GNU government. And it's very interesting because a lot of parties that are part of the GNU actually were campaigning around, solving this crisis of youth unemployment. So from our side, we've not seen much of a response from National Treasury and from the other parties that should be, responsible to responding to this crisis.
It's interesting, Nape, because all of the parties in the coalition will say that dealing with unemployment is usually their most important priority. I mean, the president has said it many, many times, and yet nothing's really changed. Do you think they just don't get it?
I really don't know where. Maybe we're overwhelmed by the many challenges that we have because, in South Africa, if you ask different people will say that our main challenge is this. But from our side, as a campaign that advocates for young people to find opportunities for work and to earn money, we really don't think that, this issue has been centered. I'm going to give an example around the schools program, the teacher assistant program that was part of the presidential employment stimulus, part of the PEP, some of the public employment programs that were a response to some of the challenges that were posed by COVID-19. That program showed that it can be really instrumental in giving young people a chance at earning their a meaningful first work experience so that they can transition into meaningful work or into other ways of earning money. But that program this year has not been implemented because the funds for that program have not been released. And the year is already over. And we also at Youth Capital, we like to think about responses to solving youth unemployment as related to responses to other challenges. At the moment, we're going through austerity. The education system is being underfunded, and those young people were there assisting teachers that were already overwhelmed by the challenges that are in the basic education system. So there's a lot of missed opportunities here, and I really think that it's a symptom, it's a sign that people are not prioritizing what they need to prioritize, in this case, youth unemployment.
So for you, is there a link between what you describe as austerity? I know the finance minister says that we're not in austerity, but there's a big argument about that. But do you think the fact that government isn't spending the same amount of money it used to spend before the pandemic is having an impact on unemployment? It's making it worse.
Yeah, the government is not spending as much money as it used to on these public employment programs, and those are obviously going to affect the numbers. The number of young people that were in schools assisting was a great number, and it was going to add on to these. And also, as we talk about the numbers, I think we need to also remember that these are people, these are lives. It's not just statistics, It's young people that we know, young people that are in our communities, that are our friends, our siblings, uncles, cousins, and so forth. So we really also need to personalize the statistics, I think, sometimes as we talk about them, to really understand the gravitas, sort of how deep the problem is, because sometimes if we don't personalize stuff, it just sounds like we're throwing around these abstract numbers.
Nape, there's so much to it. I mean, we sometimes forget how historic this is. The number of people who are unemployed in South Africa has been going up since the 1970s. I know there was a small blip in the early 2000s, but really since the 1970s. It's regional as well. Eswatini, Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Lesotho all have the same problems that we do. We obviously need a major change. If you were the president, I realize this is an unfair question because it's such a big problem, but if you were the president, what would you do? I mean, where would the changes start? Education, to me, seems to be obvious. Changes in economic policy, perhaps?
So I would prioritize three things if I was the president, around this issue. The first one being the funding of public employment programs, because as you're saying, the issues are so big, they're systematic, they require us to have some systematic kind of responses, scaled responses that can touch a lot of people, not like small programs. So I'd prioritize the public employment programs, rethink some of the public employment programs and find out what's working and what's not working. So clear monitoring and evaluation of those programs. And we replicate where it works, we improve where it doesn't work, because people deserve to have at least a first-hand sort of job experience so that they can transition into other work. Number two, I'd ensure that the skills sector works. I'd ensure that NEFSAS works, the CETAs work, And number three, create pathways or sort of an environment that's going to allow young people or everyone for that matter to be able to start their own businesses and thrive in that environment. Sort of like reduce some of the red tape that's there for people to start small businesses and for people to participate in self-employment activities. So three things, public employment programs, skills, ensure that people have the skills to participate in this economy, in the economy of the future, and also just ensure that there's pathways for people to move from that informal to the formal ways of earning money.
And Nape, I mean, there's so many things to it. I think sometimes people are just overcome by despair. I mean, you talk about the fact that these are our uncles and our fathers and our children, and I think some people just, they give up. And that's the terrible thing about this crisis, isn't it?
Yeah, in our work, as we do a lot of advocacy work, but we do that work with engaging with young people so that they, inform all of our advocacy goals. And through that, there's a lot of young people that come to us with mental health issues, our WhatsApp line. We wish that we're offering mental health services, but we don't have that scope and we don't have that capacity. So it is really taking a toll on young people's mental health. It's leading people into very, very strange and not healthy coping mechanisms and creating other social kind of problems that we have in our societies.
Nape Senong, so much more to say. Thank you very much indeed. Those figures due later this morning. Nape Senong is a mobiliser strategist at Youth Capital. Well, in a few moments, South Africa's low-skilled workers are the ones who suffered the most from our jobs crisis. Nico Mhlaba in the streets of Joburg. These are live pictures from the streets of Jozi this Tuesday.